Hi, welcome everybody. I think we've got about 20 odd people online. Just if everyone could put their microphone on mute so we don't sort of interfere with each other, that'd be great. And welcome to today's presentation, webinar on a guide for leasing and licensing sports and community facilities. My name's Neil Tredwell and I'm the Managing Partner of Tredwell Management. And I've also got Kate Spinagle with me, who has been heavily involved with this project as well. So I'm going to do a brief introduction and then I'm going to hand over to Kate and she's going to step through the guide itself. So there'll be a few people that probably waiting, so I'll let them in. A few latecomers. Just some other ground rules, given it's a fairly large audience today, it might be a bit difficult to interact too much verbally. So I encourage you to use the comment box, which hopefully most of you are familiar with. Feel free to tap in a comment or query as we work through. Hopefully we'll be able to get back to you during the session. Otherwise, we will certainly follow up with you afterwards. The other important thing to note is we are recording this webinar so that if anyone else is interested in watching it later that couldn't make this time slot, then they'll be able to view it online. So please be aware of this as well. So just a brief introduction about Tredwell. We're a sport and recreation planning firm. We've done a lot of projects throughout Australia. We're based in Adelaide and have done a lot of sort of sport and rec plans, master plans, feasibility studies, and a number of guides over the years, including for local and state governments, along with sporting and community groups as well. It's just important to note that we are not lawyers, so you'll see stated throughout the guide that you'll still need to get legal advice when preparing your leases and licenses, because obviously each case is different. Admit a few more people. We've got 27 online now, which is great. Okay, just in terms of the project background, this is being assisted by the Office for Recreation, Sport and Racing, also the local government of South Australia through their Research and Development Fund, and the City of Onkaparinga have also contributed and have been the project managers for this particular project. And we've got Craig Hobart online at the moment, and he's been the project manager and also been the chair of our working party, which we've actually formed to oversee this project. And the working party includes representatives from Sport SA, a number of local councils from regional and metropolitan Adelaide, and obviously the City of Onkaparinga as well as project managers. So in terms of today's approach, we will basically give you a little bit more background on how this guide came about. We'll talk about the current state of lease and licensing throughout South Australia. And then we're going to jump into the guide itself and step through that and give you a bit of an overview. Hopefully most of you have not had an opportunity to at least have a look over or a flick through. And then a couple of other steps, we'll look at some further resources going forward, and then watch this space in terms of, you may have heard that the Retail and Commercial Lease Miscellaneous Amendment Bill was adopted late last year and includes an exclusion for local government, so how that might be applied going forward. In terms of the overall, I guess, the background to this particular piece of work, the Office of Recreation and Sport did some research as part of one of its other projects, and one of the key outcomes of that was that there was a lot of inconsistency in lease and licence agreements across councils, and in particular that a lot of leaseholders, which were community and voluntary run organisations, found the process quite complex and potentially inequitable. So the key objectives of developing this project was obviously to identify those community needs and expectations relating to leasing council-owned sport and community facilities, and ultimately developing this guide for leasing and licensing of sport and community facilities, which is where we're at now. So the guide itself it's in draft form at the moment. It's been informed by an extensive research process and consultation process. We looked at a whole range of different background reports and studies from interstate and also locally. Looked at a lot of case studies from individual councils, a whole range of interviews with key stakeholders. There was two online surveys, one for community groups and clubs and one for local government representatives. And also we did 2 workshops as well, one for clubs and organisations and one for councils as well. So we're trying to identify leading practice, and as part of that we had to define it. So leading practice, as we refer to it in the guide, is an evidence-based approach endorsed by a subject matter expert and successfully implemented and ideally has been evaluated in some form. So I'm just going to hand over now to Kate, and she's going to step through the guide for us. So I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Neil. Just bear with me and I'll share my screen.
A couple more people jumping in.
So the project research identified the councils and wider community really value the benefits of providing these community facilities. Found that community facilities can range from smaller, older and disruptive buildings to new, large, highly functional and modern multi-use facilities. And councils are facing increasing expectations from clubs and the general community to provide a higher standard of facilities and services. We also found out that the increase in the number of larger and more sophisticated regional level community facilities is changing the way council let and manage these types of community facilities, and it's also having an impact on the clubs who are using them and community organisations. We also found that between councils, policies, fee structures and services such as maintenance can really vary considerably, and not only between one council to another, but in some cases actually within the same council. We also found the level of progression varied considerably, with some councils not having a current policy in place, while other councils have had a policy in place for many years and are working towards leading practice governance and management, maybe putting KPIs in and so forth. We also found that councils are facing increasing pressure to recognise the community benefits and reduce or remove fees. I'm just going to jump onto the actual guide now. And, hopefully you can all see that there. So we have put together the draft guide, as Neil said. It is quite long. We've had some feedback on that. It's 56 pages. And we have tried to really break up the guide by putting in some case studies, some templates. We've tried to put in tip boxes. They're in blue to get some key tips, and also some boxes in orange where you go for further information, because there's so much information on this topic and we could have made the guide a lot longer. The first page I'd like to show you in particular is when we talk about the benefits of letting community facilities. We found that everybody do value and recognise these benefits. And what we've got on this page is we really show the qualitative benefits. We talk about the social benefits, where we're actually bringing people together, creating a network and a sense of belonging. There's the health benefits involved as well. That's through providing physical activity, reducing healthcare costs, improvement in mental health, And there's also economic benefits as well. And one of the real key takeaways from this page is that graph down the bottom. And when councils are setting and terminating their fees, they need to consider the level of community benefit that they're providing. And often the greater recognition of community benefit is the lower of the fees for the tenant. The next page, we've actually provided some quantitative information around the benefits. And we found in doing this project that there is some great information out there. And we've only really touched on it here on this slide. We've got the KPMG put together a report, which is the value of community sports infrastructure. And that's where they've provided some quantitative benefits around the social benefits, the health benefits, and the economic benefits. We've also got noted on that page from the Australian Sports Commission corporate plan that sports generates 2 to 3% of Australia's gross domestic product. So we really wanted to point out to both clubs and to councils that these figures are available and they can be used and could be helpful when you begin maybe in grant funding or start working through your policies. The next page I'll just touch on and is the relevant legislation. And Neil briefly mentioned this at the start, that we're not lawyers, but we have put in some of the relevant legislation that is important to this area. Firstly being the Local Government Act, and then the other key one is the Retail and Commercial Leases Act, which we also discussed that there is that amendment bill that was passed in December. The next page also has a lot of other further legislation. Now, it may not be available to every tenant and every community facility, but it may be. And you can see there's a number of acts there. And that does lead on and show how complex this subject can be for councils. And again, it's recommended that councils seek legal advice relevant to their own individual circumstances. And this guide is a resource only. And up there you can see the orange box, and where we've got the orange boxes, that's really saying, well, where can I go for more information? This is a high level guide, but there is more information out there pretty much on every topic. And we've tried to put those in those orange boxes of where you go to get more help. Okay, policy setting. This is the second section of the guide. And this is really aimed for councils who either don't have a policy in place or are looking at changing their policy or quite significantly or however. We've got here some of the tips that will be helpful when setting a new policy or having a change to a policy. And that is to really make sure you get some clear objectives up front. And that will really guide the process. It's very important to consult with elected members and other key stakeholders and the community early in the process. Road testing the policy on current occupancy agreements will be worthwhile. That'll understand what impact it's going to have on current users of the facilities. And where there is a significant policy change, it's important to consider a phased approach. That might be, if fees are changing, that you phase that approach in over a few years, or the information that's gathered in the review section, you phase that in so clubs and community organisations aren't faced with big changes all at once. The next page is also to assist with creating that policy first time or making the changes. And these are the key areas to consider when going through and creating your policy for leasing and licensing. And further on the next page, we've got a graphic, and this is going through the steps involved in modifying a policy or creating a new policy. And that's starting off with step 1, really trying to understand the current state, where you are at the moment, and going through each step, making sure you've taken into account what council strategy is, and then working all the way through, getting to your consultation stages, both with your elected members, key stakeholders, broader consultation to the community. And once you finalise the document, you'll also have to work through those change management processes. And that will make sure that the working relationships between councils and the tenants and the broader community is really enhanced. Occupancy agreements. So this is the next section of the guide. And when we're talking about the occupancy agreements, we're talking here about the legal documents that clearly articulates what is the responsibility of the tenant and what is the responsibility of council. We found in our research and discussions that there are a group of commonly used occupancy agreements, and they cover the permit. This is a hire arrangement for a once-off or short-term use of a community facility. There's also then a licence. This is an agreement giving official permission to occupy a community facility for a set period of time, and often this is not necessarily exclusive use. Another common occupancy agreement is the lease. So the lease is where the tenant has exclusive use of a community facility and for a set period. And these can often be for longer periods of time, 5, 10, 20 years. Management agreements are also becoming increasingly common. And a management agreement is often used where the council want to adopt a shared management approach for the community facility. This could be an example of where the council is paying a management body to provide a service to manage a facility, or management agreements are also used where you may have got an exemption to the Retail and Commercial Leases Act, and it could be with a club or a hall also. In addition to those commonly used occupancy agreements, there are also variants that are used. An example of this is the head lease. This is where you've got the lease with the one main tenant, and then that head lease manages a sublease to another tenant of that community facility. Ground leases. Ground leases is where council might own the land, but the tenant has gone off and developed the land and they get to occupy that for the lease period. And at the end of the time, the land and improvements are then returned back to the landowner. Crown land leases are another complexity that councils might be using. This is when they don't actually own the land, but it's actually owned by the Crown, but the council have care and control of the land. And when you grant a lease, in this scenario, it may require ministerial approval. So that's another thing to keep an eye out for. And that can be quite common, we've found out, in some of the regional councils. Probably the key takeaway from this page is that regardless of what the occupancy agreement is called, if it takes the form of a lease, then legally it will be viewed as a lease and subject to the Act, unless you've got that exemption. The next page is quite detailed and to give the councils quite a lot of information. And we've really looked at those 4 types of common occupancy agreements and tried to show, well, what community facilities are most suited to each type and what tenants are most suited to each type. We've also gone through the advantages for council and the disadvantages of council. It's also expected that, and the disadvantages are there, it's also anticipated that no one occupancy agreement is going to meet all the needs of a council and all their community facilities. And it's rather that they're going to select a group of occupancy agreements that the council will choose. So for instance, some of the halls might be under a hire permit. You might have your, football clubs and ovals are under licence agreements. And then some of your other facilities, community facilities, might be under a longer lease term. So there becomes an exercise in working out, well, which agreement do I use? And there are a number of factors there that we've got listed to help come up with that decision point. And that might be the level of control council have, the level of resources council have available to manage the facility, the type of the facility, the type of the tenant, the number of tenants using the facility, whether it's just one tenant, multiple tenants, and the length of the tenure, and whether exclusive or non-exclusive use is required. We've then got a table there that applies a list of questions that can also help. But it's important to note that this is only a general guide and there'll be specific circumstances that council will need to consider with each one. An example there might be with the liquor licensing. You still need to comply if a club wants a club liquor licensing act, then they'll still have to apply with the regulations and the requirements of that act as well. So this is a high level guide, and individual circumstances may require you to delve in deeper and look into the individual circumstances. That's just an example of that. We won't go through the case studies today, but they're there for people to read and see how this information, I guess, is put into practical application. The guide touches a bit more on subleasing. Subleasing is where you've got the council have the initial lease agreement with the head tenant, and then the head tenant has a second agreement, a sub-agreement with a sub-tenant. One of the key takeaway, and why councils might use this, well, it encourages the facilities to be well utilised and also provides the community facility to more members of the community. And that's often what we saw in many council strategies. That was one of their key objectives to achieve. Another key takeaway from this page is that there are different types of subtenants and they will need to be managed differently. The subtenant could be another club providing a community service, or it could be a commercial tenant. That's important to take that into account when setting the fees. We also found that most councils wanted to have final approval of the agreement, the sublease agreement, so the agreement there between the head tenant and the subtenant, and they also wanted to reserve the right to negotiate the fees too, if that was required for the subtenant. Okay, occupancy agreement conditions. So these are the legal conditions in the lease document or the license document that state, what the tenant can do, and what are their responsibilities, and what are the responsibilities of the councils. We've actually got our orange box down the bottom, so that means that there's more information. So at the back of the document, there's actually quite a lengthy template, which gives all there's many different types of conditions that you might consider when putting together an occupancy agreement. So that might range to the type of insurance, indemnities, going down to details like whether the tenant can put signs on the outside, signs on the inside, what are their requirements, pest control and so forth. So that's a really exhaustive list. It's about 3 pages to consider. Some key tips is to seek legal advice on the preparation of these occupancy agreements. Another tip is that there are templates available from the local government associations. They've got some lease templates and some permit templates that go through and show the key conditions on those. This is a tip for this section, but it's really a tip throughout the whole document. We found that establishing a good working relationship with the tenant, particularly at the onset, is likely to be beneficial for both parties over the tenure of the occupancy agreement. And I guess these next 2 steps really help with establishing that working relationship. Discuss the conditions verbally with the tenant in plain English to ensure that all parties have a clear understanding of their responsibilities. As we know, clubs are run by volunteers. These occupancy agreements can be very are legal documents. They can be quite wordy. Having that face-to-face discussion will be very beneficial in the long run. And council should also offer potential tenants an induction meeting prior to signing of the agreement. Again, getting everything set up at the onset, and similarly when there's a changeover of signatories of the agreement. So all that knowledge, clubs are run by volunteers change over in time, and you just want to make sure that you've got that continual relationship as that happens. Okay, the next section's onto the property management, and then we've got the cover page there with all the balls in the air, and there probably are quite a few balls in the air to keep going with the property management and lots of areas there. I guess the key reason why we're doing this is to make sure that the community facilities are well maintained and well utilised, throughout the duration of the occupancy agreement. So this starts right at the start with that assessment of the potential tenant. And most councils have an expression of interest policy to make sure that there's a fair, equitable process, and it makes sure the tenant as well is aligned to the council's strategic objectives. There's also due diligence needs to be completed on the potential tenant, and we've actually got a checklist there to assist the tenant. Can they meet the requirements, and do they have the skills to manage the facility? And there's more information on that in the skills assessment template, which is also found at the end. I think it's really important to note as well that these shouldn't be seen as, if the tenant doesn't have all these skills, that's not necessarily a barrier to becoming a tenant of the council facility, but it really gives the council an understanding of what maybe the gaps are and how they're going to resolve those gaps, whether it's through training, additional support, and again, making sure that working relationship gets off to a really good start. Inspections and reviews. So inspections and reviews are a really important way of staying connected with the tenant, understanding the overall status of the tenant, and being assured that the community facility is getting well utilised and adequately maintained. So it's not hand over the keys and see you in a while type arrangement. The reviews can be formal or they can be informal. That's really up to the council and the tenant. And we suggest that they occur at least annually, although there may be some reasons why you might want to do that more or less frequently. The orange box again, we've actually put together quite a comprehensive template that can be used to carry out the reviews. And these templates, they can be used as is, or they can also be modified by the council to be more in line with the same language that you might use in your other documents, or to split up between different roles that council property officer may look after, or your sport and rec officer may look after. They're a guide and something that can be worked upon. Some of the tips that we have for the inspection and reviews is that when you're holding a review for the first time, that tenants may need some assistance in meeting information requests. And this again goes back to the other point we had, where you are maybe changing from an informal to a more formal review, then make sure, take the time to put that into play. A new tenant or a new facility may require a review relatively soon after signing an occupancy agreement or going into the new facility. And this will make sure that any issues are dealt with timely and get on top of them. Timing of reviews can also be aligned to other processes such as annual grant submissions, and this will reduce the duplication of information requests. When we have spoken about the volunteers, and we do need to make sure that getting this information is great, but we need to make sure that it's not too much of a burden on anyone, and where we can streamline it, we look to do so. And that also flows on to the next point, where councils can encourage tenants to become accredited with club development programs such as Star Club and Star Service. And by using this accreditation, councils get assurance that they're meeting their minimum legislative compliance legally in South Australia, but it also may mean that council can use some of the information they're providing as part of that accreditation and not have to ask for it again, and again streamline the process and by benefiting both parties. Key performance indicators. The key performance indicators, they should be clear and measurable, outcome focused, and also specific to the community facility and the tenant. We've got quite a few examples here, and they won't apply to every tenant and every council. So it's important to make sure that your KPIs do reflect the tenant and do reflect what you need them to. You don't need to have them if you don't need them. It's also really important just to consider, and probably when you talk about all these things, it does feel a lot to do, and to make sure that you've got the resource requirements both for the council and for the tenant. and to make sure that it's achievable to get them done. Another property management area is the governance. Clubs are often affiliated with state, regional associations, and they may have their own governance programs. As we mentioned, the clubs can participate in club development programs, Star Club and Star Service, and councils can leverage off these programs, and that'll reduce administration for councils and for tenants. We did see some examples as well. The way councils encourage their tenants to become members is to either make it a condition of the occupancy agreement. We also saw it that it could be a KPI to meet it within a certain amount of time. And also, we also saw it where it was an example of council funding. Some more case studies that we can look through. Here again, we're talking about that working in partnership, and that's a takeaway from property management, but it's also something that is, I guess, throughout the whole document. And that's that good work, and we saw it in the research as well, that where you had that good working relationship between council and clubs, that both parties work well together and you do achieve those community benefits. And a good example, we had some good examples, you see them through the case studies as well. And this diagram here, we're really trying to say that when you do identify a tenant that might not be complying or having some non-compliant issues, it's really suggested to work together. And I think section 2 there, you can really say, well, deeper dive into the issues, understand why the issues are happening, see what training and support, link in with pink bodies who could also provide support, and maybe revise timelines or extensions, payment plans, all those things can be done to help. Unfortunately, if that doesn't work and you're still faced with some non-compliance, then councils will need to follow their dispute management clauses, and there'll be some other clauses you would have put already in your occupancy agreements, and they might require mediation or further legal services down the track. So sort of got that graphic there showing the different steps, but we just reiterate that working in partnership and trying to to help each other to get the best outcomes will have the good outcomes. Okay, so on to our fee models. The appendice 1 actually provides an example. It's got 11 different council fee models. And you can see the councils there, and they come from their policies, and you can look to their policies for more information. And we could see that although there are some similarities in council fee models, we never actually really saw a council fee model that was identical to another one. So that does sort of show the breadth there in fee models. The Local Government Act is where it states that councils can charge fees, but it doesn't really say how to set these fees. And I think that's where over time that the flexibility and variety has come about. The next page, on to the next page, and that is certainly some of the common fee, the fee models that were most common that we saw. We still did see the peppercorn rent. That's the nominal amount, set at a very small amount. Then another fee model was a percentage of market value, market rental value, percentage of capital replacement value. Fee models also might reflect the maintenance cost, so you pay a share of the maintenance cost. It's also a set schedule of fees, and fees per square metre. And what we also saw as well, that councils might have multiple of these as well. So you might have your schedule of fees for your hires and your permits of your halls, percentage of maintenance costs, some of your ovals, peppercorn rent over the club room. So councils also used a mix of these type of fee models depending on the facility and the tenant. And this is another one of those detailed pages, but it really just gives the advantages of each and the disadvantages of each, and provides council to have a bit of a think about which fee model's best for them. Discounts and incentives, and that also came out in the appendix. A lot of the councils were having the model where you had your base fee model and you had your discount or an incentive. One of the key reasons for having these discounts and incentives is you can actually, this is a great way to recognise the community benefit provided by the tenant. And it's also a great way to achieve the desired behaviours or outcomes. We saw that fee discounts are suited to fee models where they have a higher base fee, and then incentives can often be suited to where there's a lower base fee. So for instance, if you're on a peppercorn, it's not so easy to discount, but you can provide incentives when tenants are achieving the objectives you want them to achieve. Again, it's really important that council consider the resource requirements for both council and the tenant in obtaining and analysing the information to meet the discount and incentive requirements. So the guide provides, and all these discounts we saw councils using them, and some of them use a multiple of them. So just going through each of these common types. Facility utilisation, often it is a strategy of councils to make sure their facilities are well utilised. So we may see some discounts around that, and that might be in membership numbers increasing, activities initiative increasing, evidence of shared use, social inclusion as well. This is where making sure these community facilities are used by a wide range of people, maybe a wider social group than previously was. Club equity is another, comes up in the regional councils, but it does come up in the metropolitan councils as well, that historically or potentially in the future, a club has fundraised, funded a lot of the capital development or improvement in their own facility, and now this is a way that you can actually recognise that they've done that and they've got a discount into their fees. There's a couple of ways of doing that, and I think that's shown in Appendix 1 as well. Good governance, again, discounts and incentives based on good governance. This could be through the programs that we've spoken about, Star Club, Star Service. It could be providing good financial management, evidence of quality management. The next two are probably going to become increasingly important. We haven't really touched on it, but now 2020 has been a pretty interesting start to the year, and with COVID-19 and some clubs and people will be in more financial hardship than they were before. So you can have some discounts related on the financial hardship, and also taking into the CEPA index, so the social economic status is another way that you could provide discounts and incentives. And also discounts and incentives to help with the utilities and the costs. And costs are going to become pretty closely looked at. They are when times are a bit tougher in utilities costs and so forth. Maybe clubs would really benefit from some discounts and incentives on those. Invoicing fees was another thing that came up when we started talking about fee models, base fees and discounts. And it really was suggested that when you do invoice these fees, that you invoice them at full rate, and then you actually deduct the discounts to arrive at a net fee payable. This method, it really clearly shows to the tenant that the council values the social and economic benefits that the tenant contributes to the community. A couple other tips there on the invoicing. Make sure you set up a process for obtaining the evidence prior to the invoice generating date, and that can be quite lengthy. There's information you need to gather if you do have a complex fee model. And also for seasonal sports, consider the timing of invoices, make sure they get sent to the tenant, not during their off season. And some more case studies on some, go into depth a bit more about some fee models. I think both of these, this one's like a multifaceted fee model. So. Okay, so council services. This comes back again to that good working relationship, and part of that is by council supporting their tenants and offering services. And this in turn goes on to achieve those benefits that we speak about and we so much want to have out there in the community. We've got the graphic there, and that's really demonstrating that the more investment and the more support provided by council, then the greater community benefits and returns you can get. So some of the commonly provided council services are maintenance. First of all, maintenance. It's council often look after as part of the maintenance, and the leaseholder might do the other part. Maybe the tenant's doing the day-to-day maintenance. And leading practice is actually to have, and we did see a lot of these as well in the research, a maintenance schedule that really clearly specified this is the council's responsibility, and this is the tenant's responsibility. We found that often the council were maintaining the services that may be more specialised or professional, licensed trade, etc., working from heights, and then the tenant would do more of the day-to-day carpet cleaning and so forth. Also, another service provider is facility management support. We've touched on this. Clubs are run mostly by volunteers. They might not always have the skill set and the knowledge to manage the facility. And this is changing as well. We spoke about the types of facilities changing, and so this can come really important. Making sure they get support with knowing those things as fire, safety, pest control, or even bookings, taking bookings and so forth. And this is another area where councils may find it beneficial to assist through education and training. Club development support. We saw quite a few councils that provide online newsletters. They have portals to share information available for clubs. We saw councils as well, they host regular training sessions. Sometimes they do that together to provide support to their volunteers. They may help with their strategic planning, club culture, grant funding, volunteer recruitment, training support. And again, encourage them to become part of other programs, but they get that support from another avenue. Grant assistance and capital funding. Also, councils can provide assistance. They might have a specific role for it, and to help the clubs fill in and find out what grants are available. Councils may also establish sinking funds where they can also assist the clubs with capital developments, and also things like court resurfacing, things that might come up every few years. Okay, this next section, section 7, really came about, and we spoke about in our findings, that we did find the level of progression was quite different between councils. And what we tried to do with this section was really identify some of the common issues, and then also look to some of the strategies where some of the councils we spoke to, well, we had this issue and then we did this. So we really hope this will be a really helpful page. We say, oh, I've got this issue, what shall I do? So just a couple of examples. You don't have your policy, what do I do? Well then, review your strategy and determine your outcomes of what you're trying to achieve. You can develop a policy. We've got that section 2 on the policy, in consultation with elected members and the local community, reflecting this strategy and objectives. Another example, Council Tenant is a volunteer organisation. It's experienced turnover of key roles, contacts and loss of knowledge. This is where you have the councils hosting those annual tenant informations to keep updating any new volunteers. Also have conditions on your occupancy agreement to make sure you can be notified when people change, and have that arrangement, have that face-to-face meeting with that new contact. Another issue that came up a few times as well is councils seeking to increase usage of their community facilities. Some examples here, strategies people have used is to encourage licensing over exclusive leasing, to encourage subleasing, encourage hire permits, and implement a fee model that rewards increasing use of the facility, or develop KPIs that encourage higher utilisation. So this section here is really about, I might have this issue and this is a strategy or action that other councils have fed back to us that they were in that spot, that same situation at a point in time. So tried to highlight the templates as we're going through the document. You'll see those orange boxes to direct you to go through to the templates. I'll just quickly show you what they look like there. That's the skills assessment template. This is the more lengthy one with the occupancy agreement conditions template, covering off on many categories. 3 pages. Yeah. And then the tenant review. As we said, these can be modified, adjusted, but it gives you a starting point, a good base starting point. There as well. The resources section, we did find throughout the project that there is a lot of information and a lot of really good resources out there. We really wanted to highlight those, and there's so we've got organisation, the website, and the resource, and hopefully that when you do use this guide, bit of a look here, and then you can also direct it if you need to do a deeper dive into some of the more information. And the appendice was those example fee models where we saw what councils are doing, and you could go to the individual council website to get more information on their policies and their fee models. And as we said, there's certainly similarities between them, and a lot of people had a base fee and a discount and criteria for discount, but no 2 fee models were quite the same. All right. I think that's close to the end of our guide. So I'll just jump back to the PowerPoint. Okay. So we've got a feedback survey, as Neil mentioned at the start. I think we're up to about 56 people have replied to that, and it's really important. Like, we've put lots of effort into the guide, and we want it to be as useful and practical and helpful as possible. So it's in draft form, as we said, so we're really keen to get that feedback. Tell us what you like, tell us what's helpful, tell us what you need. That would be really, really useful. So that's closing this Friday. And watch this space. So there is movement in this space, mostly with the Retail and Commercial Leases Amendment Bill, and you'll be seeing in the future how exactly that's going to impact and be adopted. So I'm not sure if Neil, if you want to add some more. That's all right.
Yeah, myself. Thanks, Kate. We just had a few questions on the chat platform, which is great. Brett from 10SSA suggested one of the ideas also is encouraging your tenants, if they're a sporting group, to register with their peak bodies or affiliate with their peak bodies, because a lot of the peak bodies do provide support in terms of resourcing and assistance with these types of agreements and so forth. And then there was a question from Jody around whether councils are required to charge rates in addition to the lease or licence fee, which is a good question. And a few people contributed there that, yeah, there's certainly a need in some cases to charge rates, but there's an opportunity to also get some exemptions and rebates, and yeah, something that needs to be looked at in conjunction with your finance department who set the rates, but there are some provisions under the Local Government Act in relation to that. And probably one of the other, or a couple of key feedback points that we've received to date. One is about providing some extra examples of fee models. So if anyone has a good example that they've implemented, that would be fantastic if you could share it with us. Drop us an email or give us a call, and flick it through. And that's probably the main points. Certainly, we're trying to get wide engagement. So if you've got local clubs and organisations as well who can provide feedback, that would be fantastic as well. So also just like to give a shout out to Chris Machotta as well from City of Ronkaparinga, who's been working with us as, in developing this guide. Between Craig and Chris, they've provided a lot of guidance and assistance with that hands-on knowledge of working with clubs on a day-to-day basis. Thank you everyone for giving up your time. I know it's a crazy busy time being the end of financial year and also with everything else going on, particularly in the sporting and community world. So appreciate your commitment to it, and as I said, this is recorded, so we'll be able to share this with people who weren't able to attend today. So we'll organise to post this up via one of the video channels so that people can access it, and provide a link so that everyone has that information at their ready if they need it. So that's pretty much it from us. So we'll wrap up now, and thank you again for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.